How to rebuild your life. At some point in your life, maybe recently, maybe right now, everything fell apart. Not just one thing, everything. The relationship you built your future around. The career you sacrificed years for. The version of yourself you thought you were becoming. The life you were certain was going to work out. Gone. And you found yourself standing in the wreckage of it, looking around at what used to be your life, asking the only question that matters in that moment. Now what? Most people never find a real answer to that question. They patch things up. They distract themselves. They go through the motions. They build something that looks like a life from the outside but feels hollow from the inside. And they call it moving on. But the Stoics, the most battle-tested philosophers in human history, had something different to say about the moment everything falls apart. They said it is not the end. It is the beginning of the most important work you will ever do. They called it reconstructio, the deliberate, disciplined, intentional rebuilding of a life from the ground up. Not patching the old one. Not pretending the damage didn't happen. Not rushing to fill the void with whatever is closest. Building something stronger. Something truer. Something that could not have existed without the collapse that made it necessary. Today I am going to show you exactly how. Welcome to Stoic Ascension. If this is your first time here, you found this at exactly the right moment. Every week on this channel we go deep into Stoic philosophy and show you how to apply it to the hardest moments of real life. Subscribe right now. Hit that button and turn on the bell. Because what we are building in this community is something you will want to be part of every single week. Now, let's talk about rebuilding your life. The truth about collapse. Before we talk about how to rebuild, we need to talk honestly about what collapse actually is. Because most people misunderstand it completely. And that misunderstanding is exactly what keeps them stuck. The world tells you that collapse is failure. That if your life fell apart, something went wrong. That you made bad choices, or had bad luck, or were somehow not enough to hold it together. That the falling apart is the problem. The Stoics looked at collapse completely differently. They looked at it the way a blacksmith looks at or pulled from the earth. Raw, unformed, full of impurities. And before it can become steel, before it can become anything of genuine value, it must go into the fire. The fire is not the destruction of the metal. The fire is the beginning of its transformation. Marcus Aurelius understood this not as philosophy but as lived experience. He became emperor at a time of plague, war, economic collapse, and political betrayal. He did not inherit a stable empire. He inherited a fire. And in his private journals, the Meditations never meant to be read, he wrote about this reality with extraordinary honesty. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. What stands in the way becomes the way. Not what stands in the way must be removed before the way can begin. What stands in the way is the way." The obstacle, the collapse, the destruction, this is not separate from your path forward. This is your path forward. And Seneca, one of the wealthiest, most powerful, most intellectually gifted men in Rome, wrote about loss and collapse with the urgency of someone who had experienced it personally. He was exiled. He lost his wealth. He faced execution. And from those experiences he wrote, "It is not that I am brave, but that I know what is truly valuable and what is not." Knowing what is truly valuable. That is what collapse reveals. Because when everything is working, when life is comfortable and full and moving in the direction you planned, you never truly know what matters. You think you do, but you don't. It is only when the comfortable things are stripped away that you discover what was real underneath. What you actually are without the props. What you actually value without the distractions. What you are actually capable of without the safety net. Collapse is not the enemy of your life. It is the most honest teacher you will ever have. And rebuilding, real rebuilding, Stoic rebuilding, begins with accepting that truth completely. Not bitterly, not with false positivity, but with the clear-eyed, steady, unflinching recognition that what happened happened, that it cannot be undone, and that the only question now is what you are going to build with what remains. The first foundation, accept what is. Every rebuilding effort, every genuine transformation from collapse to something stronger, begins with the same first step. Not planning, not action, not motivation or inspiration or a new strategy. Acceptance. And I want to be very precise about what the Stoics meant by acceptance, because it is almost always misunderstood. Acceptance does not mean approval. It does not mean you are glad the collapse happened. It does not mean you pretend it wasn't painful or that the loss wasn't real. Stoic acceptance means one specific thing. You stop arguing with reality. Because here is what most people do in the aftermath of collapse. They spend enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy fighting what has already happened. They replay the events looking for the moment they could have prevented it. They construct alternate timelines where things went differently. They argue internally, and sometimes externally, with the fact that this is now their life. And every ounce of energy spent in that argument is energy that cannot be spent rebuilding. Epictetus, who lost his physical freedom completely and still built a life of extraordinary wisdom and impact, had the most direct teaching on this. He said, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." Wish the things which happen to be as they are, not as they were, not as you wanted them to be, not as they should have been according to your plans, as they are. This is a more fatty love of fate. The Stoic practice of not merely tolerating what is, but actively embracing it as the necessary raw material of what comes next. And here is what makes this so practically powerful. When you stop arguing with what happened and start working with what is, you free up an enormous amount of cognitive and emotional energy. Energy that was being consumed by resistance, by regret, by the exhausting mental labor of fighting a reality that cannot be changed. That energy, redirected, becomes the fuel for rebuilding. There is a practice for this that I want you to try. It is simple, it is difficult, and it is completely transformative if you do it honestly. Sit down, take a piece of paper, and write at the top, "This is what is true right now," not what was true, not what you wish were true, not what you're afraid might become true. What is actually, currently, undeniably true about your situation right now. Write it plainly, without drama, without self-pity, without minimizing or catastrophizing. This relationship ended. This career is gone. This version of my life is over. This is where I am financially. This is what I have. This is what I don't have. This is who is still here. This is what I am starting with. Just the facts, clearly stated, without the story layered on top. Because once you can see clearly what is actually true, without the distortion of denial or catastrophe, you can begin to see what is actually possible. And what is possible is almost always far more than the collapsed version of yourself believes. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, and do so with all your heart." All your heart. Not resigned tolerance. Not reluctant acceptance. All your heart. That is the first foundation. And without it, nothing else holds. The second foundation. Clear the wreckage. Once you have accepted what is, truly accepted it, not as performance but as genuine inner shift, the second work of rebuilding begins. Clearing the wreckage. And this is where most people make a critical mistake. In their desperation to feel better, to feel progress, to feel like they are moving forward, they start building on top of the rubble. They layer new plans on top of unexamined wounds. They rush into new relationships before understanding what went wrong in the last one. They start new careers before knowing who they actually are without the old one. They construct new versions of themselves on foundations that are still unstable. And then they are surprised when the new structure collapses too. The Stoics were ruthlessly honest about this. Seneca wrote, "Until we have begun to go without them, we fail to realize how unnecessary many things are." Until we go without them. There is wisdom in the emptiness that comes after collapse. A clarity that is not available when everything is full. And the Stoic rebuilder uses that clarity, deliberately, carefully, to examine what actually needs to be cleared before building can begin. What does clearing the wreckage actually look like in practice? It looks like examining honestly what contributed to the collapse. Not to assign blame to yourself or anyone else, but to understand. Because understanding is the only thing that prevents repetition. If you rebuild on the same patterns, the same blind spots, the same unexamined assumptions that contributed to the collapse, you will eventually arrive at the same collapse. Perhaps in a different form, but the same result. The Stoics called this examination epimelia, care of the self. The honest, unsparing audit of who you have been, how you have thought, what you have valued, and what you have allowed. This examination requires asking questions that are uncomfortable. Where did I abandon my own values to please others or avoid conflict? Where did I ignore warning signs because acknowledging them would have required difficult action? Where did I place my sense of worth in things outside my control? Outcomes, other people's behavior, external success, and then suffer when those things changed. These are not questions to punish yourself with. They are questions to learn from. The Stoics were crystal clear on the distinction. Self-examination is not self-flagellation. It is data collection. You are looking at what happened with the eyes of a scientist. Curious, honest, looking for information that can be used. Epictetus said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." Your mind is complicit, not guilty, not condemned. Complicit, which means involved, which means there is something to examine, which means there is something to understand and therefore something to change. Clearing the wreckage also means releasing what cannot be rebuilt. And this is perhaps the hardest part of this entire process. Some things that collapsed cannot and should not be rebuilt. Some relationships ran their course. Some careers were never truly aligned with who you are. Some versions of the life you were building were constructed around other people's expectations rather than your own deepest values. The Stoic rebuilder must have the courage to look at each piece of wreckage and ask, is this something I am rebuilding because it is genuinely mine? Or am I rebuilding it out of habit, out of fear of the unknown, out of someone else's definition of what my life should look like? Not everything deserves to be rebuilt. And knowing the difference is itself a form of wisdom that the collapse, painful as it was, made possible. The third foundation, know who you are. Here is the question that sits at the absolute center of rebuilding your life. The question most people never actually answer. The question that, left unanswered, guarantees that whatever you build next will feel as empty as what came before. Who are you, stripped of everything that was taken from you? Not your title, not your relationship status, not your income level or your social circle or the neighborhood you live in or the version of yourself you presented to the world. The core. The thing that remained when everything else was removed. The Stoics had a name for this. They called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty. The rational, moral, choosing self that exists underneath every role, every title, every external circumstance. The part of you that no collapse can touch, because it was never located in anything outside you. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea constantly throughout his journals. He was emperor, husband, father, general, philosopher, and he knew that none of these roles were who he actually was. They were things he did, responsibilities he carried. But beneath all of them was something that could not be taken by plague or war or betrayal or loss. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The strength is inside. It was always inside. The collapse did not destroy it. The collapse revealed it, by removing everything that was obscuring it." Who are you? What do you actually value? Not what you were told to value, not what looked good, not what earned approval, but what genuinely matters to you at the level of your character. What are you actually capable of? Not at your comfortable best, but in the middle of hardship. Because the collapse has shown you something about your capacity that comfort never could. What kind of person do you actually want to be? Not in the abstract, but in specific, daily behavioral terms. What does that person think about? How do they treat people? How do they respond to difficulty? What do they build and why? The Stoics believed that character was not given. It was constructed daily. Through the quality of your choices, the direction of your attention, the values you acted on when no one was watching and nothing was certain. And this is actually extraordinary news for someone in the process of rebuilding. Because it means that whoever you were before the collapse is not a ceiling. It is a starting point. And the collapse itself, as painful as it was, has given you information about what you want to build differently this time. Epictetus, who began his life as a slave and became one of the most free human beings who ever lived, built his entire philosophy on this foundation. He could not control his body, his freedom, his physical circumstances, but he could control completely and entirely the quality of his character, the direction of his thought, the values he lived by. And on that foundation, that invisible, unassailable foundation, he built a life of extraordinary meaning and influence. The practice here is simple and demanding. Before you rebuild anything external, before you plan the new career, the new relationship, the new chapter, spend time with this question. Who do I want to be in this next version of my life? Not what do I want to have or achieve or experience. Who do I want to be? Write the answer in behavioral terms. Not I want to be successful. What does success mean to you, specifically, in terms of daily choices and character? Not I want to be loved. What kind of person attracts and sustains the kind of love you actually want? Get specific. Get honest. Get past the surface language and into the actual values underneath. Because everything you build externally in the next chapter of your life will only be as stable as the internal foundation you build it on. And that foundation is character. Examined, chosen, deliberately constructed character. The fourth foundation: build small and build daily. Here is where Stoic rebuilding diverges most sharply from what the world typically tells you about starting over. The world says, dream big, make bold moves, reinvent yourself completely. Transform your life overnight. Go all in immediately. The Stoics said something completely different. Build small. Build daily. Build consistently. And trust the compound. Epictetus taught that the transformation of a life happens not in dramatic moments of decision, though those matter, but in the accumulation of small, daily, consistent choices. He said, don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Embody it. In the smallest actions of the smallest days. This matters so much for rebuilding because after a collapse, motivation is unreliable. The emotional fuel that drives dramatic action is not consistent. Some days you will feel the fire and the determination. Other days you will feel nothing, hollowed out, uncertain, exhausted by the sheer weight of starting over. And the Stoic understanding of this is essential. You cannot rebuild a life on motivation. You rebuild it on discipline, on the commitment to do the small thing, the right thing, the foundational thing, regardless of how you feel about it on any given day. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Let the urgency of life determine what you do, not the urgency of the dramatic gesture or the grand plan. The urgency of the present moment. This day, this hour, this choice." What does building small and building daily look like in practice? It looks like deciding on 3 non-negotiable daily practices that align with who you want to be, and protecting them as if your life depends on them. Because your rebuilt life literally does. These might be physical, a walk, a workout, time outside. Because after collapse, the body is often the first thing neglected, and the body is the foundation of everything. When you cannot control your external circumstances, you can control whether you move, whether you sleep, whether you nourish yourself. And exercising that control, even in small ways, rebuilds the experience of agency when everything else feels out of your hands. They might be mental, reading, journaling, the Stoic evening review. Because the mind after collapse tends toward chaos, cycling through regret and fear and uncertainty. Giving your mind a daily structure, a daily practice, a daily direction. This is not luxury. This is survival. They might be relational. One honest conversation per day with someone who knows and values you. Because isolation after collapse is one of the most dangerous patterns there is. The Stoics were deeply relational. They believed that human beings were built for community and that wisdom could not be built alone. Seneca's letters, Marcus Aurelius's reflection, Epictetus's teaching, all of it was relational. Built in conversation and connection. 3 practices. Every day. non-negotiable. Not because they will transform your life overnight. They won't. But because they will transform you, slowly, steadily, compound interest style, over months and years into the person who is capable of living the life you are rebuilding toward. And there is something else that small daily building does that grand gestures cannot. Proves to yourself daily that you are capable, that you can do the hard thing, that you can show up on the days when you don't feel like it, that you are not at the mercy of your circumstances or your emotions or your history. Every small daily act of discipline is evidence, deposited into your own self-belief, that you are someone who builds, someone who shows up, someone who is capable of more than the collapse suggested. And that evidence accumulates, until one day you look back and realize that the person you have become through all these small daily choices is someone your collapsed self would not have recognized. That is rebuilding. That is the Stoic way. The fifth foundation: reframe the story. There is a story you are telling yourself about what happened, about why your life fell apart, about what it means, about what it says about you, about what is possible now. And that story, more than any external circumstance, is determining the pace and the quality of your rebuilding. Because your life does not move in the direction of your circumstances. It moves in the direction of your narrative. The story you tell about who you are and what happened to you and what is therefore possible. That story is the invisible architecture of everything you build next. The Stoics understood this with remarkable depth. They called it hypolepsis, the judgment or opinion you form about events. And they were clear that this judgment was not fixed. It was not handed to you by the event itself. It was something you constructed, consciously or unconsciously, and something you therefore had the power to reconstruct. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. When something difficult happened, he would deliberately examine the story he was telling about it and ask, is there another story? A truer story? A more useful story? One that is honest about the difficulty but doesn't end with defeat. And the most powerful reframe available to anyone rebuilding their life is this one. This collapse did not happen to me. It happened for me. Not in a naive, everything happens for a reason way that dismisses real pain, but in a specific, examined, honest way. What did this collapse make possible that was not possible before? What did it reveal that was hidden when everything was comfortable? What did it force you to confront that needed to be confronted? Seneca lost his position, his wealth, and nearly his life. And from that experience, he wrote some of the most profound, most enduring, most practically useful philosophy in human history. The collapse was the condition for the creation. Your collapse is a condition too. For what? That depends entirely on what story you choose to tell about it. Here is a second reframe that the Stoics used with particular power. I am not starting over. I am starting wiser. Starting over implies returning to zero. Implies that the years you spent before the collapse were wasted. That you are back at the beginning with nothing to show for what came before. But you are not at zero. You are at experience. At hard-won understanding. At the kind of clarity about yourself and about life that cannot be purchased or studied or achieved any other way than through genuine difficulty. You know things now that you didn't know before. About what you can endure. About what actually matters. About who shows up when things are hard and who disappears. About what you built that was real and what was illusion. That knowledge is not nothing. That knowledge is the most valuable asset you have as you begin to build again. And the third reframe, the one that I believe is the most transformative of all. The version of me that comes out of this rebuilding will be stronger than the version that went in. Not despite the collapse. Because of it. Because steel is not made without fire. Because the muscle that rebuilds after being torn is stronger than the one that was never challenged. Because the human being who chooses to rebuild after losing everything has access to a depth of character and a quality of resilience that was simply not available to the person who had never been tested. You are being forged, right now, in this difficulty, into something that could not have existed without it. Tell that story every day, because it is true, and because the story you tell about yourself is the blueprint of the life you build. The sixth foundation: choose your circle with intention. The Stoics believed something that modern research has now confirmed with extraordinary evidence. You do not rebuild alone. The quality of your inner circle, the people you spend your time with, confide in, and allow to influence your thinking, is one of the most powerful determinants of whether your rebuilding succeeds or fails. Epictetus was direct about this. He said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Not people who are merely comfortable. Not people who tell you what you want to hear. Not people who join you in victimhood or conspiracy or bitterness. People who improve you." After a collapse, the temptation is to gravitate toward people who share your pain, who validate your grievances, who confirm the darkest version of your story. And while genuine emotional support is real and necessary, there is a difference between a person who witnesses your pain and helps you move through it, and a person who sits in the pain with you indefinitely and calls that friendship. The Stoics would say, you need people who see what you are capable of, not just what you have suffered. Marcus Aurelius surrounded himself, wherever possible, with philosophers and thinkers who challenged him, who told him hard truths, who held him to his own stated values. His journals are full of gratitude for these people, not for their comfort, for their honesty. Seneca wrote letters to a young friend named Lucilius not to console him but to challenge him, to give him frameworks, to hold him to a higher standard than his circumstances. And those letters, written across 2,000 years, are still doing the same work for every person who reads them. This is what you need in your rebuilding circle. People who see the version of you that is being built, not just the wreckage you are building from. And if those people are not currently in your life, build toward them. Seek them out. The Stoics believed that philosophy, genuine wisdom, was community. It was built in relationship. It was practiced in conversation. And the absence of that community is one of the most serious impediments to rebuilding there is. At the same time, and this is equally important, be intentional about the voices you remove from your orbit during this rebuilding period. The voices of people who define you by your collapse, who expect you to remain broken, who have a vested interest in you not rebuilding, because your growth would require them to examine their own stagnation. You do not owe your healing to people who profit from your suffering. Choose your circle, deliberately, intentionally, with the same care you would use to choose the materials you build your house from. Because the voices around you during this rebuilding period are forming the walls of the new version of your life. Make sure they are building something worthy of who you are becoming. The rebuilt life. We are nearing the end of this video, and I want to paint a picture of what awaits on the other side of this rebuilding process. Not as a promise of ease or comfort or the absence of difficulty, but as a description of what becomes possible for a human being who goes through genuine Stoic rebuilding rather than merely patching the surface of a collapsed life. What awaits is a life built on foundation rather than circumstance. A life that is yours, not assembled from other people's expectations or inherited definitions of success, but genuinely, specifically, deliberately yours. Built on your examined values, shaped by your chosen character, directed by your authentic sense of what matters. What awaits is resilience that cannot be manufactured any other way. The deep, unshakable knowledge, not belief, knowledge, that you can survive the worst, that you have survived the worst. That difficulty will come again, as it always does, and that you will not be destroyed by it, because you have already proven, to yourself and in your own experience, that you are stronger than your hardest moment. What awaits is clarity. The extraordinary clarity that comes from having stripped away everything that was not essential and discovered what remains. Most people never know what they actually value because they have never been forced to live without the things that were obscuring it. You have. And what you found in that emptiness, what you discovered mattered most, that is yours now in a way it never was before. And what awaits is the capacity to help others in a way that was simply not possible before your collapse. Because the person who has never been broken cannot truly reach the person who is currently breaking. But you can. You know what this feels like. You know what it costs. You know what it requires. And that knowledge, that earned, hard-won, forged-in-fire knowledge, is one of the most valuable things one human being can offer another. Seneca wrote, "Per aspera ad astra," through hardship to the stars, not around it. not avoiding it, not waiting for it to pass before you begin to live through it. That is where you are right now, in the through. And the fact that you are here, watching this, thinking about this, taking this seriously, means something. It means you have not given up. It means you are still choosing. It means that the part of you that the collapse could not touch is still here, still functional, still choosing the direction of growth over the comfort of stagnation. That is enough. That is the beginning. If this video met you where you are today, if something in it landed, shifted, or gave you a single step forward, do one thing. Subscribe to Stoic Ascension right now. Hit that button. Turn on the notification bell. Because every single week on this channel, we go deep into the ancient wisdom that actually helps with the hardest parts of real human life. We are not here for inspiration that fades by Monday. We are here for philosophy that changes how you live. This community is full of people who are rebuilding, who are choosing growth over bitterness, who are using ancient wisdom to build something modern and real and genuinely worth having. There is a place here for you. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs it today. And come back next week, because the rebuilding continues, and you do not have to do it alone. Stay disciplined. Stay present.